All right, we're back again today with the second part of the murders in the Rue Morgue. So, let's get to it. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Part 4. Murderers had come to the old house on the street called the Rue Morgue. Murderers had come and gone and left behind the dead bodies of an old woman and her daughter. The daughter's body was in the bedroom on the fourth floor. The old woman was lying outside behind the house, her head almost cut off, but the knife which killed her was up in the bedroom on the floor. The door and the windows were all firmly closed, locked on the inside. There was no way for anyone to go in or out. Voices had been heard. One voice was speaking in French. The other voice had not spoken even one word that anyone could understand. But there was no one in the room when the police arrived. This much we had learned from the newspapers, my friend Dupin and I. Interested by it, we had gone to look at the house and the bodies. Dupin was now explaining to me what he had learned there. That is what we learned from the newspapers. Please remember it, for that much was enough to tell me what I must look for when we were in the house on the Rue Morgue. And I found it. Let us now take ourselves again in our thoughts to the room where the murders were done. What shall we first look at? The way the murderers escaped. All right, we agree, I am sure, that we do not have to look for anything outside of nature, for anything not having a real form, a body. The killers were not spirits, they were real. They could not go through walls. Then how did they escape? There's only one way to reason on that subject, and it must lead us to the answer. Let us look one at a time at the possible ways to escape. It is clear that the killers were in the room where the daughter was found. From this room, they must have escaped. How? At first, I saw no way out. It must have been necessary for the neighbors to break down the door in order to enter the room. There was no other door. The opening above the fireplace is not big enough, near the top, for even a small animal. The murderers, therefore, must have escaped through one of the windows. This may not seem possible. We must prove that it is possible. There are two windows in the room. Both of them, you will remember, are made of two parts. To open the window of one, must lift up the bottom half. One of these windows is easily seen. The lower part of the other is out of sight behind the big bed. I looked carefully at the first of the windows. It was firmly closed, fastened, like the door on the inside. To keep the window closed, to fasten it, someone had put a strong iron nail into the wood at the side of the window in such a way that the window could not be raised. At least it seemed that the nail held the window closed. The nail was easy to see. There it was. And the people who discovered the killings used their greatest strength and could not raise the window. I, too, tried to raise the window and could not. I went to the second window and looked behind the bed at the lower half of the window. There was a nail here, too, which held the window closed. Without moving the bed, I tried to open this window also, and again I could not do it. I did not stop looking for an answer, however, because I knew that what did not seem possible must be proved to be possible. The killers, or perhaps I should say the killer, for I am almost certain there was only one. The killer escaped through one of these windows. Of this I felt certain. And the murderer had left the bedroom. He could have closed the window from the outside, but he could not have fastened it again on the inside. Yet anyone could see that the nails which held the windows tightly closed. This was the fact that stopped the police. How could the murderer put the nail back in its place? Perhaps if you pulled out the nail. Yes, that's just what I thought. Two things seemed clear. First, there had to be something wrong with the idea that the nails were holding the windows closed. I didn't know what was wrong. Something was. Second, if it was not the nails which were holding the windows closed, then something else was holding them closed, something hard to see, something hidden. I went back to the first window. With great effort, I pulled out the nail. Then I again tried to raise the window. It was still firmly closed. This did not surprise me. There had to be a hidden lock, I thought, inside the window. I felt the window carefully with my fingers. Indeed, I found a button which, when pressed, opened an inner lock. With almost no effort, I raised the window. Now I knew that the killer could close the window from outside, and the window would lock itself, but there was still the nail. Carefully, I put the nail back into the hole from which I had taken it. Then I pressed the button and tried to raise the window. I could not. The nail was also holding the window closed. Well, then the murderer could not possibly have gone out the window. He couldn't not have gone out that window. Therefore, he must have escaped through the other window. The other window was also held closed by a nail, but I knew I must be right. Although no one else had looked carefully at the window behind the bed, I went to it and tried to see whether the two windows were in some way different. The nail in the second window looked the same as the one I had seen. I moved the bed so I could look closely. Yes, there was a button here too. I was so sure I was right that without touching the nail, I pressed the button and tried to raise the window. Up it went. As the window went up, it carried with it the top part of the nail, the head. When I closed the window, the head of the nail was again in its place. It looked just as it had looked before. I took the head of the nail in my fingers, and easily it came away from the window. I saw that the nail had been broken. But when I put the nail head back into place, the nail again looked whole. What seemed to not be possible, it proved to be possible. The murderer indeed escaped through that window. I could now see in my mind what had happened. It was a hot summer night. When the murderer first arrived, he found the window open to let some of the fresh night air come in. Through the open window, the murderer went in and came out again. As he came out, he closed the window, perhaps with a purpose to do this, perhaps by chance. The special lock inside the window held the window firmly closed. The nail only seemed to be holding it closed, and that which was possible looked not possible. Dupin had not been talking to me, it seemed, but to himself. His cold eyes seemed to see only what was in his own mind. Now he stopped and looked straight at me. His eyes were now hard and bright, and I understood that using his unusual reasoning power to find the answer to these bloody murders was giving Dupin great pleasure. At first, I could think only of this, and then I said, "Dupin, the windows are on the 4th floor, far above the ground, even an open window." "Yes." "That is an interesting question. How did the murderers go from the window down to the ground?" Once I was quite certain that the murderer had in fact gone through the window. The rest was not so hard to know, and the answer to this question told me still more about who the murderer was. When you and I first came to the house on the Rue Morgue, we walked around the house. At that time I noted a long, thin metal pole which went from the top of the building to the ground, a lightning rod, put there to carry down the ground a charge of electricity that might come out of the clouds during a bad summer storm. Here, I thought, is a way for someone to go up or down the wall, and then go in or out the window. He would have to be very strong. Although certain animals could easily go up the pole, not every man could do it, only a man with very special strength and special training. This told me more about what the murderer was like. But I still had the question, who? Part 5. That unusual Frenchman, Auguste Dupin, was still explaining to me how he found the answer to the question of who murdered the two women in the house on the Rue Morgue. We now knew that it was indeed possible for the killer to go in and again out one of the windows and still leave them both firmly closed, locked on the inside. And I agreed with Dupin when he said that only someone with very special strength and training could have gone up the lightning rod on the side of the house and thus entered the window. But who the murderer was, we still did not know. "Let us look again," said Dupin, "at the room on the 4th floor. Let us now go back in our minds to the room we saw yesterday. Consider its appearance. Clothes had been thrown around the room, yet it seemed that none had been taken. The old woman and her daughter almost never left the house. They had little use for many clothes. Those that were found in the room were as good as any they had. If the killer took some, why didn't he take the best, or take all? And why would he take a few clothes and leave all the money? Nearly the whole amount brought from the bank was found in bags on the floor. I want you therefore to forget the idea in the minds of the police, the idea that a desire for money was what they call the motive, the reason for the murder. The idea rose in their mind when they heard how the money was brought to the house 3 days before the killing. But this is only what we call a coincidence, two things happening at the same time, but only by chance and not because of some cause that brought them together. Coincidences happen to all of us every day of our lives. If the gold was the reason for the murders, the killer must have been quite a fool to forget and leave it there. No, I don't think that a desire for money was the reason for these killings. I think that there was no reason for these killings except, perhaps, fear. Now let's look at the murders themselves. A girl is killed by powerful hands around the neck, and then her body is placed in the opening over the fireplace, head down. The murders we usually hear about are like this. There is something here that does not fit our ideas of human action, even when we think of men of the most terrible kind. Think also of the great strength that was necessary to put the body where it was found. The strength of several men was needed to pull it down. There are other signs of this fearful strength. In front of the fireplace, some gray human hair was lying. Thick pieces of it pulled from the head of the old woman. You saw the hair on the floor yourself, and you saw the blood and skin with it. You know, and I know, that great force is necessary to pull out even 20 or 30 hairs at one time. A much greater force was needed to pull out hundreds of hairs at one time. Also, the head of the old lady was cut almost completely from the body. Why? To kill a woman with a knife is not necessary to cut her head off. If now added to all these things, we add also the condition of the room, then we have put together the following ideas: strength more than human, wildness less than human, a murder without reason, horror beyond human understanding, and a voice which made no sound that men could understand. What result then have you come to? What have I helped you to see? A cold feeling went up and down my back as Dupin asked me the question. A man. Someone who has lost his mind, I said. A madman! A madman! Only a madman could have done these murders. I think not. In some ways your idea is a good one, but madmen are from one country or another. Their cries may be terrible, but they are made of words, and some of the words can be understood. Here, look at this hair. I took it from the fingers of the old woman. The hair of a madman is not like this. Tell me what you think it is. Dupin, this hair is not human hair. I did not say that it is. But before we decide on this matter, look at the picture that I have made here on this piece of paper. It is a picture of the marks on the daughter's neck. The doctor said these marks were made by fingers. Let us spread the paper on the table before us. Try to put your fingers all at the same time on the picture so that your hand and its fingers will fit the picture of the marks on the daughter's neck. I cannot. No, but perhaps we are not doing this the right way. The paper is spread out on the table. The human neck is round. Here's a piece of wood about as big as the daughter's neck. Put the paper around it and try again. Go on. Try. I tried to put my fingers around the piece of wood, as if it were the girl's neck, but still my hand was not large enough to equal the marks left by the killer. Dupin, these marks were made by no human hand. No, they were not. I am almost certain that they were made by the hand of an orangutan, one of whose man-like animals that live in the wild forests. The great size, the strength, the wildness of these animals are well known. Now, look in this book by Cuvier. Read. Look at the picture. I did so, and at once I knew that Dupin was right about everything he said. The color of the hair, the size of the hands, the terrible strength, the wildness of the killings, these sounds, which were a voice but not words, everything fit nicely in its place. No, not everything. Dupin, I said, there were two voices. Whose was the second voice? The second voice, yes, remember, we decided that only someone with a very special kind of strength could have gone up the lightning rod, up the side of the house to the window on the fourth floor, perhaps an animal, perhaps a strong man from a circus, perhaps a sailor. We know now that one of the voices was the voice of an animal, an orangutan. The other was the voice of a man. His voice spoke only two words, and they were, "My God," spoken in French. Upon these two words I have placed my hopes of finding the full answer to this horrible question. The words were an expression of horror. That means that a Frenchman knew about these murders. It is possible, indeed it is probable, that the Frenchman himself did not help the orangutan to kill. Perhaps the animal escaped from him and he followed it to the house on the Rue Morgue. He could not have caught it again. It must still be free somewhere in Paris. I will not continue with these guesses, for I cannot call them more than that if I am right, and if the Frenchman did not himself help with the killings. I expect him to come here. Read this. I paid to have this put in the newspaper. I took the newspaper and read the following. Caught. Early in the morning of the 7th of the month, a very large orangutan, the owner, who is known to be a sailor, may have the animal again if he can prove it is his. But, Dupin, how can you know that the man is a sailor? Oh, I do not know it. I am sure of it. I think the man was a sailor. A sailor could go up that pole on the side of the house. Sailors travel to strange, faraway places where such things as orangutans can be got. If I am right, well, think for a moment. The sailor will say to himself, the animal is valuable. Why shouldn't I go to get it? The police do not know the animal killed 2 women, and clearly somebody knows I am in Paris. If I do not go to get the animal, they will ask why. I don't want anyone to start asking questions about the animal, so I will go and get the orangutan and keep it where no one will see it until this trouble is past. This, I believe, is how the sailor will think. But listen, I hear a man's step on the stairs. Dupin had left the front door of the house open, and the visitor entered without using the bell. He came several steps up the stairs and then stopped. We heard him go down again. Dupin was moving toward the door when we again heard the stranger coming up. He did not turn back a second time, but came straight to the door of our room. In a strong, warm, friendly voice, Dupin said, "Come in, my friend, come in." Slowly the door opened, and in came a sailor. So, let's find out in the last installment if this assumption that Auguste Dupin has made is correct. Was it, in fact, an orangutan that killed this woman, that cut the other woman's head off, that stuffed the daughter up the chimney? Or was it, as our protagonist thinks, just a madman? Now remember, the time that this was written, asylums were just coming into fashion. We were starting to focus less on the supernatural and more on the natural and the reasoning and what is it that people are willing to do to each other. So that is why these 2 men are so quick to dismiss the supernatural. And in fact, it is why Edgar Allan Poe seems so dismissive often of the supernatural as causes of death. He says these are often the work of people and ignorance or fear or hatred that cause such horrors. Part 6. My friend Dupin was now certain that the murders in the Rue Morgue had been done by a wild animal of the jungle, the man-like animal known as an orangutan. The animal had escaped from its owner, he thought, and the owner was probably a sailor. He had put a notice in the newspaper that the man who owned the orangutan could have it again if he came to our house to get it. Now, as the owner came to our door, we were both wondering if the man would, as Dupin guessed, be a sailor. Yes, the man who entered was indeed a sailor. He was a large man and strong. He carried a big, heavy piece of wood, but no gun. He said to us in French, "Good evening." "Sit down, my friend. I suppose you have come to ask about the orangutan, a very fine animal. I have no doubt that it is a very valuable animal. How old do you think it may be?" "I have no way of guessing how old it is, but I cannot be more than 4 or 5 years old. Have you got it here?" No, we have no place for it here. You can get it in the morning. Of course, you can prove it is yours." Yes, I can." "I wish I could keep it." "I would like to have it. I, of course, would pay you for finding and keeping the animal. Anything within reason." "Well, that is very fair indeed. Let me think. What shall I ask for? I know. Let this be my pay. Tell me everything you know about the murders in the Rue Morgue." As quickly as he had spoken, Dupin walked to the door, locked it, and put his key in his coat. At the same time, he took a gun out of his coat and placed it on the table. The sailor's face had become red. He jumped to his feet and reached for his stick of wood, but in the next moment he fell back into the chair, trembling. His face had become quite white, bloodless. He spoke not a word. His eyes were closed. "My friend, you must not be afraid. We are not going to hurt you, but I know very well that you yourself are not the killer. But it is true that you know something about him, or about it. From what I have already said, you must know that I have ways of learning about the matter, ways that you could never have dreamed of. Now I know that you yourself have done nothing wrong. You did not even take any of the money. You have no reason to be afraid to talk and to tell the truth. It is a matter of honor for you to tell all you know. And you know who the killer is." "So help me God, I'll tell you all I know about this. All I know. But I do not expect you to believe one half of what I say, not one half. Still, I did not kill anyone. I'll tell you the whole story if I die for it. It was that animal, the orangutan. About a year ago, our ship sailed to the Far East, to the island of Borneo. I had never before seen Borneo. The forest, the jungle, was thick with trees and other plants, was hot and wet and dark. But we went, my friend and I, we went to that forest for pleasure. There we saw this orangutan, a big animal. But we were two, and we caught it. We took it with us on the ship. Soon, however, my friend died, and the animal was mine. But it was very strong and caused a lot of trouble. In the end, I brought it back to Paris with me. I kept it in my own house, carefully locked up so the neighbors could not know about it. The animal had cut one foot badly while on the ship. I thought that as soon as it got well, I would sell it. I was certain it was of great value, and it was so much trouble to keep. I wanted to sell it soon. The night of the murders, very late, I came home and found the animal in my bedroom. It had got free, I don't know how. I held a knife in its hands and was playing with it. I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. When it saw me, it jumped up, ran out of the room and down the stairs. There, it found an open window and jumped into the street. I followed, never far behind. Although I had no hope of catching it again. The animal with the knife in its hand stopped often to look at me, but before I could come near again to even try to catch it, the animal always started running again. It seemed to be playing with me. I was near early morning, but the streets were still dark and quiet. We passed by the back of a house in the Rue Morgue. The animal looked up and saw a light in the open window of a room high above. It was the only lighted window in sight. The animal saw the metal pole, went up it easily and quickly, and jumped into the room. All this didn't take a minute. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I could do. I followed the animal. I, too, went up the pole. I am a sailor. It was easy for me. But the open window was far from the pole, and I was afraid to try to jump. I could see in the room, however, through the other window, which was closed. The two women were sitting there with their backs to the window. Who can guess why they were not sleeping at that hour of the night? A box was in the middle of the floor. The papers which had been in the box were lying around the floor. The women seemed to be studying some of these. They did not see the animal, which was just standing there, watching, the knife in one hand. But the old woman heard it and turned her head and saw the animal there, knife in hand, and then I heard the first of those terrible cries. When the animal heard the old woman's cry, it caught her by the hair and slowly moved the knife before her face. The daughter, filled with terror, fell to the floor and remained there without moving, her eyes closed. The old woman continued to cry for help, screaming with fear. I think the animal now was as afraid as the old woman was. It was a terrible force that pulled out a handful of hair, and when the caught woman, covered in blood, tried to run from it, the animal caught her again by the hair, and one move of its arms nearly cut her head from her body. Throwing down the body, the animal turned and saw that the daughter was moving, watching it with horror. With fire in its eyes, it rushed to the girl, put its powerful fingers around her neck, and pressed them firmly there until she died. When the girl stopped moving, the animal dropped her body to the floor and looked up. It saw my face in the window. It began to run around the room quickly, with a purpose. It jumped up and down, breaking the chair, pulling its bed to pieces. Suddenly it stopped and took the body of the daughter, and, as if to hide it with terrible strength, it put the body up above the fireplace where it was found. It threw the old woman out the window. All this time I was hanging from the pole, filled with horror. It seemed I had lost the power to move. But when I saw the animal coming towards the window with the old woman's body, my horror became fear. I went quickly down. I almost fell down the pole and I ran. I didn't look back. I ran. Oh my God. Oh God. The chief of police was not happy that the answer to the mystery of the killings had been found by someone who was not a policeman. He said that people should keep to their own business. Let him talk, said Dupin. Let him talk. He'll feel better for it. He's still a good fellow. But he makes things less simple than they really are. Still, people call him skillful and even wise. I think they say this because of the way he explains carefully, fully, something which is not here or there or anywhere. He says, not possible, about something which is there before his eyes. With that, we end our reading of The Murders of the Rue Morgue, the first detective story in history. A great story about deduction and reasoning, and how if we eschew the supernatural and we only use logic, we can come to this solution to any number of problems.